I know that it's common to speak of anti-Semitism as being the world's oldest hatred, and that's a separate conversation and one that is absolutely valid. But given that we're focusing on the Christian question, I often try to grapple with the reasons that it seems to find itself in the crosshairs of its enemies. So with regards to Islam, it makes sense. Islam considers itself to be the one true religion. The Quran and Eid and all the rest of it is effectively the culmination of universal truth, and everything else that went before it was a lead up to that perfection. And so they believe theologically that it's supreme. And so that makes sense for them why they would go after Christians, because Christians are, in the eyes of them, inferior infidels and are not to be treated in the same way. So you don't have to do too much working out as to why that might happen. But with regards to secularism, and you're a priest who's followed his vocation, and I would be interested to hear what you make of the notion that is Christianity in the crosshairs of those who are secular because it's almost too high an ideal for people to follow, that it's the ultimate judgment on a person's conscience and character, because it calls you to be more every day, and it calls you to recognize your own faults and sins and imperfections every day. And people are just too proud to want to deal with that and have these people who are trying to straighten themselves, the crooked wood, as it were, there as a sign of their own inferiority. And I don't say that through my own supposed superiority, but it just seems to me that Christians get a seriously raw deal, and people want to dismiss it and diminish it. But clearly, it's bequeathed so much to the world in terms of human dignity, regardless of faith, and it feels like people are quite willing to turn a blind eye to that, take the fruits as they think, but basically get rid of all the annoying Christians at the same time, because it puts a mirror on them they're not willing to look into. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yes. What you're saying partly is, of course, the central theory of Tom Holland's book Dominion, that all these so-called values. I find it interesting whenever they talk about European values or British value. Whenever there's a terrorist attack, the politicians say, "Well, we won't let this destroy our values." Well, what are our values? Well, if it's just tolerance, that's nothing. Do we tolerate a mass murderer? The values are essentially Christian. That's Tom Holland's point. Secularists don't want to acknowledge that. It's a very deep question. Part of what you say, I think, is correct. Perhaps in the past, sometimes Christians have imposed. Pope St. John Paul used to say beautifully, Christianity, now Catholicism, proposes. It doesn't impose. So yes, we propose the highest ideal, the greatest ideal for humanity, of what we're called to, that we can be great. But there is a peculiar hatred of Christianity. As I said earlier about, for example, sexual ethics, people obviously feel we're bigots. We've got no right to tell people how to live, all this kind of thing. Partly of those, well, it's. I'm thinking, for example, of the European Constitution. Remember that great debate when Christianity was removed, the foundation of Europe was not mentioned. A denial of history, once again, a denial of reality. I'm thinking of for our readers and our viewers who read their Bibles well, that passage in the letter of St. James when he talks about looking in the mirror and walking away and forgetting what we look like. There's an essence of that about this. Who are we as people? Well, can we live? I think T.S. Eliot said, I'll paraphrase him badly, but something like, obviously writing probably in the 30s or 40s, he said that there's an attempt to live without these foundational values. And he said it will fail, but we have to somehow live through this moment. And this has obviously increased massively now to that's why I talked about a veneer. Sometimes Britain can look a bit like a stage set with the cathedrals and But if you sort of look behind it, there's nothing there. It's empty. Even though there's a little bit of a religious revival, which is also very interesting. But secularism itself as an ideology is almost, we could go all the way back to the Roman Empire, that you can't have two gods. You've got to serve the emperor. And if now the emperor is the secular state in all its ways, including controlling family life, including controlling education, which is not the business of the state to control education of your children completely, or you bow to the true God and live in a plural state. We're not talking about a theocracy or these are always thrown at us again. We want to be, you're the Christian ayatollahs or something. No, but there is a place for that freedom of religion, which I would also give to Islam within those parameters of living in that plural state. But I think the secular state's attempt, once again, Bible verses. Jesus said, house built on sand has no foundations, and when the wind and the rain come, it will fall, and what a fall. A house built on rock will survive. Jesus wasn't, he was the divine architect, but it's just a fact that you can't, this building built on sand will one day collapse, and it will be a mighty fall.
You raised some interesting points there as you referenced the European Union talking, or at least when it was instituting the constitution for the EU, and it reminded me of walking the Camino de Santiago with my fiance, very soon to be wife, and we what I noticed along the way on the signs, which had the scallop shell that was is synonymous with St. James, was that beneath each of those signs, it was something along the lines of, this has been brought to you by, or this has been gifted by the Cultural and Historic Association of the European Union. Almost nowhere did it even really reference the Christian story, nor the fact that that pilgrimage network going all the way to Santiago, which spreads all the way through the Iberian Peninsula, all the way through France to the Low Countries, to northern Italy, to Switzerland, to beyond Poland. I think even you can join onto it. It's clear to anyone who even looks at it for 2 seconds that it was this faith, and it was the institution based in Rome itself that was building anything that we could say was Europe. And there is this a total it's an erasure. It's in a different way. It's not the same as the Islamic erasure, but it's almost like an institutional laundering. Look what we give you, but you're just parasiting off it in some way. And another point, as you were talking and thinking about that erasure, I just saw a clip from a conference which Eric Kaufmann at the University of Buckingham had arranged at the Centre of Heterodox Social Science, and he had Matt Goodwin speaking about the changing demographics, the changing religious makeup, and what that might mean, and how it's having a serious impact on identity, and some of Britain's citizens are not integrating very well. And another speaker there who writes for the Free Press, which is a Barry Weiss run publication, she's called Batya Ungar Sargon. I didn't know actually that she might have been from a Muslim background, but
she's Jewish.
Oh, she's Jewish, is she? Oh,
Jewish. Yeah,
very interesting.
Which is interesting. Yeah, I've met her once. She's a very interesting lady. But I know the carry on. But I know the clip you're talking. I literally saw it this morning as well.
Yeah, same. So she effectively told Matt Goodwin that he was effectively being inflammatory and dismissive, and there's no way to talk about citizens of a country because the West is built on Judeo-Christian and Muslim values. Now that is interesting. I've never heard that combination before, and I'm not entirely sure, now I know she's a Jewish woman, why she would launder that in, but I just can't see even the most uneducated person about these matters finding that believable at all, or why she thought that was appropriate.
It's very peculiar. As I said, I've met her once. I've heard her speak. I like her a lot. I think she says some very, very interesting stuff. She's sort of on economics and things. She's really pulled the the fact that the Republicans now are the party of the working class in America, and but that's very odd, and not true, because you could say, well, some of the West is built on Islam because it was the conquest of Islam, but no, that's peculiar, and I think perhaps sometimes that's an American issue of not living under Islam is quite well integrated in many ways. And I was talking to someone about this yesterday, that there aren't the sort of cities which are almost completely majority Muslim, and Sharia law is in place. So I think that's rather peculiar. I don't have an answer of why she brought that up. It's peculiar.
Yes, I think I brought it up because it felt like if that somehow gets traction, it's another path down towards erasure, or, as you were talking about earlier on, a changing or dismissal of historical facts.
Well, sorry to interrupt, John. Please. It's not just this is the thing. It's erasure, but it's deliberate, like you said about the Camino. You can get very conspiracy theory-ish, but I think it's a denial of reality, a deliberate denial of reality. It's a pretense that at some point there'll be unfortunately it is happening in some cathedrals, when crazy golf and helter-skelters and things are put in there. What were these buildings created for? They had only one purpose, which is and was the worship of the true God, the Christian God. They weren't mosques. They're not synagogues, but there'll be a point where they are, and they are in many ways museums. When you go into a cathedral, Catholic or Anglican, people are wandering in as tourists. We could be walking into a Shinto temple in Japan with the same attitude. To be positive, though, I think perhaps it's good to have a little bit of positivity as well, or not optimism, perhaps hope is better. It's a theological virtue. There is this seeming revival, small, but that is also very interesting, that the majority, I think the clergy, or particularly bishops, leaders in the church, who are still, many of them, the boomers and people educated in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, are not picking up the fact that for an average English person, again, I will speak only of England, for a young person in England, let's say under 30, 35 or whatever, they really have no concept of Christianity, basic concepts. So in some ways there's a lot of talk of inoculation and immunity, and in many ways they're ready to be infected by Christianity, because it's a new, the concepts are new. And when you look at Western society, we hear of this tragedy, the loneliness and the young people's suicides. And when Christians offer, back to our earlier part of our conversation, when we propose a vision of what it means to be a human, of what it means to be a man and a woman, which apparently is controversial now to say that there are such things and there's no other such thing. When we call people to the highest ideal, knowing that we're weak and sinners and failures, but also Christianity is the great religion of offering hope to people who fail and fall, letting them get up again, the religion of the second chance, the third chance, the fifth chance. When we offered that to people who've had no exposure to that, it's not surprising that apparently the churches are seeing, Orthodox churches are seeing quite significant numbers of young people, men and women, coming into the church across Europe. Last year, this Easter, apparently they said there were 10,000 baptisms in France, secular France. That's extraordinary.